Hello and welcome. This is episode 21 of a podcast Engineer-to-Manager. I'm your host, Oleg Maestrenko. In this podcast, we are diving into the essence of engineering management. We explore what is engineering management, what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities. For this journey, I invite experienced engineering managers from different parts of the world. Today's guest is Mark Tsimelzon. Hello, Mark. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good, thanks for asking. I'm happy to have you here on the podcast. You're now Director of Engineering at Meta, previously working at, I cannot count how many organizations you worked at, with at the level of EP of Engineering, Director of Engineering, some organizations like Yahoo are on the list, or Babylon, maybe less known. Akamai Technologies, actually I knew that one, and before going into the space of development, you studied at MIT and Stanford, so outstanding career, outstanding life. Is everything correct? Do you want anything to add?
No, it's pretty much all true. Yes, I've done a lot. I've worked in a number of companies. At many I stayed for 2-3 years, so over 30 years accumulates. At Meta, I've been here for 5 years, which is definitely on the longer side for me.
Okay, and before the podcast, we explored a little bit what happened before your professional career. You mentioned you were from a country of Azerbaijan, so very interesting how you settled, if you want to share that part of your life.
Yeah, I was born in Azerbaijan back when it was a part of the Soviet Union. But when I was 16, close to 17, my whole family moved to the States. That was 1989, 1990. And since then I lived in the States for I think 27 years. And then seven years ago, I moved with my family to London.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have been moving around, I guess, quite a bit. And in the States, I spent the first 5 years in Massachusetts and then moved to California. And that's where most of my professional career was, in California.
So Silicon Valley is your second home or first home, if you want?
It's a good question. People ask me where my home is. I mean, right now it's London, but yes, I lived the longest in Silicon Valley. I go there every 3 months. It still feels like home to a very large extent.
And why did you move to London, if you can ask?
It's purely just to try something new, right? I mean, we lived in Mountain View, California with my wife and 2 children for 20-something years. Well, the children obviously didn't start 20 years ago. They're now 13 and 17. But we just felt like after you live in Silicon Valley, in Mountain View, California for 20 years, you want something else. You want a larger city. You want to be close to Europe. You just want a change in life. And that's why we moved to London. It was definitely a good move. People ask me all the time, what's better, Silicon Valley or London? They both have their advantages and disadvantages. But for us at this point, given that we have already tried Silicon Valley for many years, London is a good place.
Okay. And from their career choice or from their community, because London is a huge technological hub, right? And Silicon Valley is like the hugest IT hub.
So yes, I think if you are starting your career, then maybe Silicon Valley is a better place, right? It's just the spirit of Silicon Valley, of like starting companies, all these startups. It's very different from any other place I know, including London. London has its share of startups and large companies, so it's a good place to have a career. But to start, and especially if somebody is interested in startups, Silicon Valley is still unbeatable. Just the networks that exist there, the networks of investors, of advisors, of professionals, they are absolutely second to none.
I see. So let's unroll your professional career and let's go from the university because, MIT and Stanford is something outstanding in the whole world, right? And why did you go to the MIT first?
Well, so we came to Massachusetts with my family, and that just happened that MIT was literally within a few miles of where we lived. And I didn't know much about MIT, but I knew some things that, hey, it's like Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's not it's a place that you hear about even when you grow up back in the Soviet Union. So I believe it's one of the best places to study computer science. So it was obvious that, hey, if you can get in there, that would make sense. And I loved MIT. It was like what I really feel sets MIT apart is that the best professors of computer science actually care a lot about teaching undergrads.
Mm-hmm.
You maybe hear that in some top universities, professors care more about research or maybe graduate students, but not about undergrads.
Mm-hmm.
MIT kind of teaching undergrads is it's a religion. Kind of all professors take it extremely seriously. So I got to take lots of good classes. I got to do some research with some top professors. So that was great. And then I thought I would try graduate school because at that point I was already working as a programmer kind of part-time on summers pretty much like for 3 or 4 years. So I felt, hey, I kind of know what the software engineer job is all about, or thought. So I thought, kind of maybe I didn't really know, but I thought I knew. I heard there is this thing called graduate school, and I applied and I got into Stanford. And I moved to California, which was great. And Stanford is a very nice place, but I felt that to really do well in graduate school, you have to be maybe much more motivated by research.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered I was not as motivated by that. It takes a very long time to get a PhD. Like I think the average is 7 years.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to focus on doing research when there are so many startups around you, when everybody starts companies. My advisor that I started working with immediately went on sabbatical to do his own startup. So it was crazy that so I felt, hey, I've been here for like a year and a half. I will just go join some startup. And I never regretted that. But it's for somebody who wants to do research or do something theoretical, it's a great place.
You made a very interesting remark. You said that when you studied at MIT, you thought you were understanding how the software industry works or how to be a software developer. Does it mean that, we all believe that MIT is, at least I believe MIT is a great place as well, and that there you get real information that can be useful for you in the startups, in the companies. And now I hear, doubts around that. Is that correct?
No, look, I mean, first, no university really prepares you to be a great software engineer, right? That's not really what they're for. Even the degree that you get is called the computer science in most universities, right? So, and as far as that is concerned, I think the quality of MIT education for computer science is, like I said, is extremely high. The only thing that really prepares you to being a software engineer and then a manager is hands-on experience, is actually working for companies. And like I said, by the time I graduated, I already had close to 4 years of experience of working for companies, mostly part-time, but maybe like full-time during summers. So most of my opinion that, hey, I know what I'm doing was based on that. Right? Hey, I've been here. I've been actually building some production software. I kind of know what I'm doing. So yeah, I think when you're young, you always think that you know more than you actually do. And in some cases, that's great, right? So, I mean, that's one reason why so many young people start companies, start their own startups, because they don't know what they don't know, right? So if you listen to some experienced entrepreneurs, they say, oh my God, if I knew it was so hard to really start a company and grow.
Yeah. I've never done it.
Exactly. So that's where, I don't think I was kind of saying, hey, you know everything, but it was like a software engineer writing code. I can always do that. Graduate school, that sounds cool. I would try it. So I tried it. I got some experience. I've met some very smart professors and some very smart people. But yeah, I just when I thought about spending 7 years finishing my PhD, I just felt like, okay, that was too much.
Lots of people are saying university is about building the community, and you mentioned like meeting lots of great people. Was it true for you?
It was true for me, even though I am pretty introverted. I didn't really go to lots of parties and kind of mixers, but still, I met some great people, and some of the connections have proved extremely useful. So you mentioned Akamai, for example. That's the company that was started by an MIT professor, by Tom Layton, the guy that I did research with when I was at MIT. So Akamai ended up buying my first startup, and that was the connection there. So I'm not saying that they bought it only because I was his student, but at least the connection happened because of that relationship. So relationships are super important, but I wouldn't say that's the only thing you get Because sometimes people say, oh yeah, top universities, they don't really teach you anything, but they give you connections. I think I learned a thing or two during
All right.
universities as well.
You mentioned several times that you had a startup. So let's go then to the next step. Then you decided to abandon your PhD in Stanford, and you decided to go for the startup. Were you a founder, a developer? Can you share what happened there?
So the very first job I had after Stanford was I was a software engineer. I was the first engineer in a startup. That was many years ago, building some software for mobile devices, even before there were pretty much any mobile devices out there, right? So they're talking about late 1990s.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and then after that, I think it was interesting. I went to another startup now as a software manager. I also felt, hey, I know everything there is to know about software engineering. Now I can try management. I'm sure that's easy. And I worked there for a few years. I learned some things about management, some pretty painful lessons, and we can talk more about it. And then I started my first startup, and it was in the personalization space, and it was acquired when it was still pretty small, maybe 15, 20 people. It was acquired by Akamai, and then I spent some time at Akamai, and then I started my second startup. So yes, after that, I was very firmly in the startup world for a while. Then one of these startups got acquired by Yahoo, not my startup, but the next startup where I was VP of engineering. And that's how I got into Yahoo. And that's kind of a whole different story. But let's maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah. Because let's focus on the transition that you had between basically the IC and the managerial. You mentioned there you learned a lot of things. Actually, I believe the same as you learned when you went to the first IC job, but as a podcast is more about their management. So how did it happen? Why did you decide to go to the management job from the IC?
So look, a lot of my transitions, they didn't happen because I had a very detailed plan for the next 10 years, right? It was more like I was getting a bit bored at my company. And I had a friend who was working as a manager in a startup, but that startup was building some hardware and software. So my friend was managing the hardware part, and he was doing very well, but they had nobody to manage the software part. And they say, hey, you're a smart guy. You've done some cool things. You don't know anything about management. That's okay. You'll learn. And I joined that company, and I started learning pretty quickly that management was very different from what I thought it was, right? And my first, maybe most painful lessons were that I had this idea that, hey, I'm the manager. I should tell people exactly what to do. Right? If I know what needs to be done, I'll just tell them what to do, and I'll check that they actually do it right, and then life is good, right? And then I very quickly, within the next few months, I learned that people were really not happy with being micromanaged, and I was a really bad micromanager at that point. And they told me, look, several people told me that either you change or we leave the company. And I said, okay, clearly I'm not doing something.
All right, yeah, that's not the way it should work.
Yeah, and I started thinking, I started learning more about management, reading some books about it. Didn't have lots of podcasts like this back then, but there were already some good books. And just talking to people, trying to understand, talking to more experienced managers, because that's the nice thing in Silicon Valley. You can find more experienced people than you any day of the week. And then I realized that, you want to give people good goals, you want to help them, you want to empower them, but you want them to leverage their initiative. You want them to come up with ideas. Mm-hmm. That's both good because they have some good ideas, and maybe some of them are better than yours. Mm-hmm. Also, that's how they feel happy and productive, and they don't feel micromanaged. And that was definitely the very first the very first clear learning from being a manager, is that this is not, I had this idea that my manager is like my right hand, right? My right hand doesn't complain, doesn't say, hey, why do I need to grab this glass, right? So my right hand just does exactly what I tell it to do. Human beings are different. So that was a, maybe looking back, it's a very obvious learning. But again, nobody prepares you to being a manager. So I feel that, and I've seen many other people go through these stages.
Right. You basically had the chance and you decided to take it and try it out. Mm-hmm. And that was not the motivation, but the sequence of events that happened at that point in time. And did you ever step back and thought about like what motivates you? Is it what you want to do? Because that was like, well, occasionally, right? But then you run as a manager for a substantial time, or when we talk today, right? And did you thought like, was it the right decision? What motivates you then to continue their management journey?
Yeah, I think that for me, being a manager is definitely a good fit. I mean, I tried slightly different roles, but I always came back to management. I feel that it's exactly the right combination, right? Because on the one side, I mean, I'm motivated by building something great, right? So that's a huge part of my motivation. But you can't really build something great if you're just by yourself sitting in your bedroom just coding. So you have to have people around you. You have to leverage other people, and that's to me is a kind of what being a manager is all about. Is that you build a team, you try to figure out how to align all the incentives, how to make sure that people understand what we are building, people understand the vision, people understand why we do things,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of all together you can achieve much more than any single person can. And look, I mean, I've seen people have amazing leadership careers as ICs as well. And that's
Right,
actually
right,
where
right.
Meta is very good at. At Meta, you can be a very senior individual contributor, kind of at director level, even at VP level, get paid as much as any director or VP, but not have formal management responsibilities. You still end up leading people, right? So it's kind of interesting because even though we call them ICs, very few of them just sit there and code. They still lead large projects. They provide technical leadership, technical mentorship. So in the end, you still end up working with people. You're still not just a purely sole contributor sitting in your cube.
True. But there, as I see, you have more grip or touch with their technical things, and that's your main focus, right? Yeah, that's interesting because I think we share this because I have the same attitude. Because with their team, as a manager, you can achieve more, and if you can achieve more, you can create greater things, right? And as a person who likes to create things, you understand, all right, this is the way or one of the ways you can fulfill your dream and have the fulfillment in your life.
Yeah, and maybe I'll also add that it also helps if you actually enjoy working with people and you get energized by talking to people. It's kind of interesting. I think I mentioned I'm like introverted and go to lots of very loud parties, but having one-on-ones with people, that's what really that's a big part of my day kind of that I'm looking forward to. Maybe not like large meetings with like 200 people, but more one-on-ones or small meetings where we can discuss things and we can make some progress.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say if you don't like that, if you are really not a fan of people, I wouldn't go into management. If you don't have empathy, because that's what kind of being a manager is all about, right? So yes, on the one side, you use people, you build some great product, but on the other side, you support people, you make sure that these people are happy, that they are kind of a great part of the org.
Right. Interesting. So then when you became their manager, was it or just a VP already, or was it like engineering and then you grew step by step to a VP director role?
Yeah, look, I mean, these titles, you have to always make them relative to the company, right? So, I mean, I had VP roles where I would have 20 people report to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a director role and I have 200 people report to me, right? So that's why I really advise people not to focus too much on the details of the title, because again, they're different between companies, and also you can miss some great opportunities if you only care about the title. But for me, again, after I was a manager in that startup for a while, I started my own company, and there, of course, I mean, I called myself CTO. I had 0 engineers, but I was the chief technical officer. What does it mean, right? It doesn't mean much. So I think I learned a lot from my own startups, and you learn both about engineering and you learn about business and about building the product that people actually want, which probably is the hardest part of building a startup or any product. Is it's not just the technical part. I mean, that's often solvable fairly easily. But figuring out the right product, that's
right. I think I had this discussion with one of the guests, and their roles are indeed different in different companies. But what is important and what really struck me in that conversation, that by the role you defined the distance between people making their decision and their distance to people who are working on something like hands-on. And then basically, if you look from this perspective, you understand that the VP, it may be a small startup with 10 people, but this is a person who makes a decision on their company-wide level, right? And if you go to EM, then it might be a huge company like Meta, but this is going into something very specific on their project level or on their small part of the product level.
Yes, that is true. But again, I think it also, people should always consider about the overall company size, right? And how it all relates, because again, as a VP in a startup, you'll be much closer to both the CEO of the company and to an individual engineer than, let's say, as a director in Meta, where you have huge distances both ways.
Mm-hmm. If we talk to like Meta and their distance, how far away are you from Mark?
I think there is have a VP, senior, so maybe 3 people.
Oh, wow, nice.
So I would say both directions, to Mark and to engineer who actually writes code, is about 3 people both ways.
Okay, so you're kind of in the middle of the organization, if it's correct to say this way. Do you ever met Mark?
I've seen him in meetings a few times.
Okay.
So, I spent a lot of time with Mark.
Oh, just possibly in something interesting because they're a kind of very well-known person, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, first, Mark does Q&A with all of Meta a couple of times a month, right? So he's very good at doing that. But then, I've met him a few times in smaller meetings on some specific topics about, hey, we want to launch this product.
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing the right thing? Is this the right strategy? Is this the right product? So, but look, I will never say that I'm close to Mark in any sense of the word.
Yeah, I understand. But kind of, I would say, interacted with him on some hands-on things in the sense, like you mentioned, their product launch or... Yeah, that's interesting. But let's come back to you. So you mentioned that you went to the managerial role, and then you said starting your own. Like, was it again by chance, or was it a directed goal?
Honestly, when you are in Silicon Valley, especially back then, it's hard to know. It's hard to tell about right now, but back then, everybody was starting companies, right? So it was just like, that's what the thing you do. So honestly, this was a bit of that, right? Like, hey, I'm a smart guy, I have a good education. I have some good experience. Why wouldn't I start a company? So, which is not necessarily the best way to start a company, maybe not the worst either. So, I had a good idea about, was probably a bit too early for its time around like very heavy personalization of web. But I raised a bit of money. I hired some people. We built some cool product. We got some first users. And then, of course, the time became it was very clear that the .com crash was coming. So you had to sell to somebody. And we ended up selling to Akamai. And then I spent a few years at Akamai and then started my second company. So maybe not for exactly the same reason. Maybe back then I already had other motivations. But look, like I said, I don't believe in 10-year planning. So I believe in doing what you find interesting right now, trying new things. And then that's how when I look at my career, it's definitely a sequence of taking some gambles, and some of them played out. Some of them did not play out. I mostly had fun. I had with startups, it's always a roller coaster.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's definitely not like, hey, life is good all the time. It's like one day you raised some money or you sold some technology to some big company. You are really excited. You feel everything goes great. And then the next day something bad happens. Some company said, oh no, we're going with your competitor. Somebody quit. That's really hard as a manager, right? It takes you a while to learn that, hey, people sometimes quit, right? Even if it's not your fault, somebody may have some other ideas or some other reasons. So startups are very it's an emotionally they're very challenging.
Yeah. That's true, because basically you're challenged by the market, you're challenged by the time frame, by investors, and you're trying to also build from their idea to the implementation, which takes a lot of details to pop up during this transition.
Yes. So yes, and you learn being a good manager there, right? Because again, being a good manager to me is thinking about business questions, strategic questions, as well as technology or just your team. So in startups, you learn that. So you learn both sides of. I mean, there are three sides to management to me. It's the people, technology, and then the business product. So in startups, you get that side very well.
Yeah, and when you're right now, like in a bigger company, do you also have these three pillars that you have to think about?
Yeah, I would say that's what I like about Meta, frankly. I'm not here to represent Meta or to sell Meta, but especially kind of at senior manager, director levels, you really kind of are responsible for the business part of your product. Or you don't have, there are other companies where for example, you have product managers and they just tell you what to do. As an engineering manager, your job is just take what product managers tell you to do. They write the spec and you implement it and you're responsible for execution. If that spec is bad, it's not your problem. At Meta, that's explicitly not the case. So if you're an engineering manager and you build some useless product, you can never say, so a product manager told me to do that. You will not succeed if you do this. So
that's a good thing, actually, because then you take the responsibility for whatever you're doing, right? And you understand the context and not only the technical side, but also like, okay, will we gain more users or will we achieve the target that we are setting for this product, and then go from to the numbers that you are putting in front of your product, and it creates you a complete picture of the house that you're building, not just putting the bricks, right? In that saying it goes.
Yeah, for me that works really well. I've seen some people being uncomfortable with this. They're saying, "Hey, I'm an engineer. I'm not a business person. How do I know if this is a good business idea?" But again, in the Meta and the way I like to do this, it's you're a partner, right? You partner with product manager, you partner with your business side, and you jointly make these decisions. And then either you're jointly successful or you're jointly unsuccessful.
You had lots of gambles, and there's some worked, some didn't. Would you be comfortable talking about what didn't work for you?
Yeah, look, I would say even when something doesn't work, you still learn a ton from it, right? So if you look at, like you mentioned Yahoo, right? I was not happy at Yahoo. It was maybe early Yahoo was better, but when I joined, it was already pretty bureaucratic. And I just kind of this whole kind of, you just felt like micromanaged pretty much all the time. That said, when I was at Yahoo, I was working on Hadoop, which again, I don't even know how many people actually know Hadoop these days, right? It's kind of...
I know the name. I know it's Apache right now. I think an Apache Foundation.
It's an Apache project, yes. But that was the very first project for managing very large data in a very scalable way, right? So this whole kind of... Right now, people talk about machine learning revolution. Before that, if you think about kind of what happened before, was the big data revolution. Just the idea that you have all these data, maybe forget about machine learning, but just how do you build systems that manage a ton of data? How do you build search engines? How to build advertising systems on like scale of Yahoo? So that was what Hadoop was. And that was very interesting. So that was actually explicitly the reason why I went to Yahoo, was to work on that project.
Okay.
And so from that side, I learned a ton, and I actually built some very interesting technology. But as kind of working for Yahoo was really not my idea of fun. So I definitely was not happy there. So that's what I would say. Kind of, you always kind of, even if you don't stay in a company for a long time, and even if you are not super happy there, kind of you still learn things. You still meet some good people. So I always kind of I try to think about it that way. Is that everything is a learning experience.
Yeah, it's really nice to separate good things and their bad things, all that you like and you don't like, and they're put on a scale. Like, okay, is it still more of a learning thing that I like? Yes, it is. And when the scale goes the other way, you say, well, I guess that's what you did. So like, okay, goodbye. I go for the next challenge that I have or available.
I know not everybody thinks about it this way. I know people who are like, for every job, they have very specific goals that, hey, I want to get to this level, or I want to make this much money, or I mean, I've never been a person who does that. I just you just keep doing what you like doing. And as long as you're learning new things and trying new things, then good things accumulate, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
A plan that's kind of perfectly executed over 20 years.
If we're talk about your last position, so you're right now at Meta, and you're a director of engineering. Why did you join it? What was or what has been your challenge that you accepted, or when you joined Meta?
Yeah, so I was in London at that point, and I was thinking about kind of what I wanted to do. And like I said, there are fewer companies in London, there are fewer startups, and I was thinking, well, kind of what do I really want to do? And I learned about WhatsApp hiring engineering director in London. So I work for WhatsApp, right? So even though I work for Meta, what I do is WhatsApp. And WhatsApp at that point in London was actually very much a startup. There were maybe 30 people there. So it kind of felt like a very ground floor opportunity. And I thought I would try it. Because I think I mentioned that I've been burnt with Yahoo, but I felt that, hey, maybe Yahoo was just a special case. Maybe there are big companies that are still fun to work for and doing great things. And I felt
back to big tech.
Yeah, so I thought I would try it, right? Because look, I want to be very clear, right? The first years, like 10, 20 years, 15 years of my career, I worked for startups. And I thought that's like all cool kids work for startups, right? So either you start your own or you join a startup, but I felt that you don't really work for a large company if you're good. And then I tried Yahoo, and that was okay, well, maybe I met some great people there, but I kind of felt that, yeah, it wasn't a great experience overall. But I felt I would give Facebook, we didn't have Meta back then, it was Facebook, a try. I mean, Facebook had a good reputation, still does as an engineers company. And I thought I would give it a try. And because the position was managing a fairly small team and growing the team at WhatsApp, I felt, okay, so maybe it's close enough to a startup that at least I would give it a try. But still, I was pretty convinced that I would last there for a couple of years and I would leave. And yeah, the fact that I've been there for 5 years, it surprises me to no end. It means that something is going right there. So,
but when you joined WhatsApp, WhatsApp has been already been a big organization, right? So it's like the London division was pretty small.
Well, even WhatsApp it depends on your definition of big, right? So WhatsApp overall was maybe 200 people, maybe 200 engineers, right? So, by Meta standards, that's not big, right?
Yeah.
And yes, and the London part was, like I said, 20 or 30 engineers, so it was even much smaller. So, but it was also that I was motivated, as I always say, is by the actual project or the area I was going to lead. So what I do at WhatsApp is kind of protecting WhatsApp from all kinds of harms, right? From security issues, from spam, scams, impersonation attempts, like social engineering, even kind of child imagery. There are people, as you know, who share things that they really should not be sharing. So that's kind of my kind of area of expertise is protecting WhatsApp and its users from everything that's bad that possibly happens on WhatsApp. At the same time, worrying about privacy and making sure that WhatsApp is number one in privacy when it gets to messaging platforms. So, and I felt that was really interesting, right? Like I said, I've had experience with large data systems, but not so much with security and what we call integrity problems. Like spam is not a security problem, but it's an integrity problem.
Yeah, indeed.
So that's what I kind of got excited about, that space. And then I felt, okay, let's see how it goes. And that's what I'm still mostly doing. I've got some other teams I help manage right now, but mostly I'm still most of my time is spent on all kinds of issues that you can read about in the papers about misinformation. So that's what I do.
Yeah, as a WhatsApp user, I sometimes get this strange requests from numbers, I don't know, to work for Amazon, so to say, or whatever company is there.
Exactly. So please report those messages, right? Every time you report those messages, something happens, right? So
they go to your team.
First they go to our classifiers, right? To our machine learning systems, and then in some cases they will be escalated to humans to understand what's going on. But yes, that's exactly what we do. And like I said, so there are many different kinds of issues. So there are scams like what you are talking about, but then there's social engineering. People kind of lose access to the system because of somebody got access to their account by tricking them in some way. So there are lots of these challenges. And there are businesses on WhatsApp now, and some of these businesses obviously are doing the right thing. They just want to connect with their users. Some of these businesses are also trying to send maybe some spammy messages or some scammy messages. So my job is to make sure that this doesn't happen, that the good businesses are successful on WhatsApp and the bad businesses or the bad actors are not.
Yeah, I see. So basically, you mentioned that there are 3 pillars for manager to take care of. So people, technology, and business. Right now, we are talking about business, about people. You mentioned like one-to-one that you really like. And this brings me to the question, like, what does your typical week look like? Like, do you have several one-to-ones? Do you go to the technical meetings? Like, in general, can you share?
Yeah, so I have a fair number of one-to-ones. So I have the people I directly manage. They're mostly managers, although some of them are senior engineers. So with them, I usually meet once a week or sometimes every 2 weeks. But then there is kind of the next layer of managers or senior ICs. I try to meet them once a month, once every 2 months.
So those skip levels are one-to-one.
So that takes quite a bit of time. But then there are a lot of meetings where we talk about specific projects, specific areas. And many of those meetings are not just engineering meetings. They are what we call XFN, cross-functional meetings. So you have product managers there, you have data scientists there, you have lawyers there, because many of the things we do are very heavily, we have to make sure we are doing legal things and we protect our users and we don't misuse their information. So we have legal people, we have policy people. So you have a lot of these discussions about, are we doing the right things? Are we protecting our users? Are we protecting the platform? Are we respecting the laws of the country? And we are in lots of different countries, so there are lots of different laws. So are we doing the right thing for each one of them? So, and then there are some purely technical discussions as well. But I wouldn't say that's the majority of my time. That's a part of my time. But I probably spend more time on individual discussions one-on-one. And sometimes you get into some very interesting technical questions in those one-on-one discussions. But sometimes they are more about career growth, like how this person is thinking about their career, where they want to grow, how they are doing with their manager. So all of these discussions. So it's a mix. It's a mix of project specific meetings and one-on-one, and then kind of all combinations of these.
Do you have block time for your own stuff, like, I don't know, learn something or take a dive into the technologies that might be there, or learn about like people management? So do you have like block time where you have no meetings, just to do something on your own?
That's more on my kind of my spare time, right? So kind of I read a lot about kind of different technologies, and especially like right now, it's such an interesting time, right? So you have all this whole AI revolution. I feel this is by far the most interesting time kind of to be in the technology space. So I read a lot about that, but that's more in my spare time. Kind of during the work day, it's kind of hard to find time for. Because I mean, the other challenge is because we are in London, a lot of WhatsApp is still in California. So you have to figure out how to organize a lot of these conversations.
So it's like 7-hour difference, I guess, something like that.
Yeah, it's 8 hours.
8 hours, okay. 8 hours. Well, so basically.
But it also teaches you how to be independent, right? So yeah, like my manager, like the VP of WhatsApp is in California. So that's why I have more of a chance to do what I think is right. because of the time difference. I don't kind of have to go and ask him all the time, hey, what do you think about this idea? I come to him when I need some help.
And your team is all located in the UK, so it's all local, or is it also distributed?
The majority of it is in the UK, although I have some people in California, and then there are some remote people in different parts of Europe or England or the US. But the majority is the center of mass is in London.
Because their work with a distributed team and different cultures is very specific, and there requires additional energy that you have to put into that, and their time management as well.
Yeah, I would say cultures, because cultures, like the culture of Meta in London and Meta in California is very, very similar. And also because I lived in California, so to me, this is not some foreign culture. I've seen so what you're talking about, I've seen most when people try to outsource to a different country, right? So if you're trying to outsource to Eastern Europe or to India or to somewhere else, then it's a very different culture, and you are dealing with the whole. So I had some of these projects. That's where culture becomes a very big challenge.
So if you're not outsourcing your hiring, then when you're hiring at Meta, I don't know if you have any open positions, but what is your approach? How do you approach that hiring into your team?
Well, so there are lots of parts to this, right? So first of all, for individual contributors, for let's say junior to mid-level, even senior, but not very senior engineers. Mm-hmm. We usually don't even hire them into our team, right? So they get hired into Meta.
All right.
In the same way that Google was, I think, pioneered this. You get hired into the company, and then within the company, you find the right opportunity. For more senior people, that's not the case. The senior people generally know where they're coming to. Look, Meta has a very deep sort of philosophy of how to do hiring, how to do interviewing. You have very structured interviews, right? So in my previous life, an interview would be hey, come over, talk to these 4 or 5 people. Each interview would be more like a conversation like this. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a problem for you to solve, done. And then we all get together and say, okay, that's a good person, let's hire them. With Meta, you have a much more structured setup. Each interview is designed to test a different part of your skill set. So for a manager, for example, so there's an interview on people management. There's an interview on project management. Mm-hmm. There are different kinds of technical interviews. There is a behavioral interviews to understand how well this person gets along with others and what motivates them and why they want to come to work for the company. So and then after the interview, you write a pretty long report. Hey, mm-hmm. These are the questions I asked, and this is what the person answered, and I think this was a good answer for this reason, or this was a bad answer for this reason. And then all of this goes to some hiring committee that looks at all of this and says, okay, overall, we feel that's a good person or that's not a good person. So, look, I have sort of fairly mixed feelings about this, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good way to do it if you have resources and if you're not trying to grow very fast. I mean, and if you really want to make sure that you never, ever hire a bad person, then yes, having all of these systems in place, that helps, and you still make mistakes, right? This is not a foolproof process, but this process is definitely designed to reduce the probability of you hiring, of making a mistake. If you're a startup, if you're trying to hire fast and grow fast, you probably will have a simpler process, and sometimes it will work as well as this big method process.
Yeah. If you would be hiring outside of this predefined process, what qualities would you be looking at when you hire a manager?
For a manager specifically, I think, so look, I mean, the areas that Meta is looking for are the right ones, absolutely, right? Number one is you're looking for how they think about people, right? The people side. Do they have empathy, right? Do they think about people as resources, right? Just, hey, we'll just need 5 resources and we'll do X.
Numbers in Excel, that's it, full stop.
There are people like that, right? And especially people who come maybe from consulting backgrounds. You interview them and you see that they don't think about human beings. They think about, I'm not trying to generalize, right? There are great people in consulting, but I've seen this more often than not, that some people from those backgrounds are, they don't really think much about, hey, how do I grow people? How do I help them get to where they want to get, right? So that's, or how you manage underperformers, right? Everybody has like some bad times. How do you help people? But then at some point, you also need to make a decision and manage somebody out, right? If they are really not working out. How do you think about this, and how do you do all of this in a human way, right? Not just right. So I think that's one area. Making sure that the manager understands how to deliver things, right? How kind of project management, but how to make sure that you structure projects, how to make sure that that you can execute. Oh, and then I believe managers have to be technical, right? There are no two ways around that. Being technical means different things, maybe at different levels.
True.
Like at Meta, for example, if you are interviewing for a manager or senior manager position, there is a coding interview. Okay. If you are interviewing for director position or VP position, there is not. But there are still like systems design interviews, right? So you still want to make sure that the person you're hiring understands engineering, understands how to build complex systems. So again, I may have a slightly different bar in some of these areas, but fundamentally, you're looking for somebody who will be who was a strong engineer in the past. That's actually how some people think about the bar. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're a manager, you've been doing this for 20 years, you're not writing code. Okay, that's fine. But I want to be convinced that at some point you were a strong engineer and you had strong problem-solving ability. And that's what I think is important.
Did you have to go to the system design interview yourself when you're...
Of course, yeah. Multiple system design interviews, right? And there are like different kinds even. So one of them is you're just being told like on the spot, design Twitter, right? Yeah. So it sounds crazy, right? But if you have done this before, maybe if you know what to expect, you have 45 minutes, you can probably cover quite a bit there, or design kind of Dropbox, or design some part of Facebook. So that's one kind of the interviews. And the other one is more about, tell us about some complex system that your team has designed. Okay. And you say, okay, we have built this system. And then the interviewer starts really going down and say, hey, but why did you make this decision? But why did you use this technology? Why did you kind of make this choice versus that choice? What mistakes did you make in designing this system? Kind of what lessons have you learned? And that's what you have to be able to answer. Kind of, and just say, hey, my engineers kind of made these mistakes, or my manager told me to use this technology. That's not my fault. That's not a good situation.
Well, I guess even I decided to go to ChatGPT and ask her, and gave the precondition would be already a much better answer than my engineers just decided to do so.
Yeah, but still, I probably wouldn't just say, hey, ChatGPT just told me so, right? So, I mean, that's a great start, right? If you're trying to learn about some new area, you don't know much about it, you say, hey, ChatGPT, tell me what are the systems on the market, what are their pros and cons. Mm-hmm. But I would hope that kind of a good candidate would then do a bit more research and kind of think through about which of these systems are really applicable to their problem, why not. So yes, there's probably a bit more to it than just ChatGPT. I'm not worried about ChatGPT taking my job away anytime soon.
Oh, so you're not convinced about all the threats that are coming from the AI to you?
I'm very convinced that AI represents some amazing changes in how things will happen, but replacing specifically engineering managers, I feel that will be a while. And even engineers, right? Good engineers don't just write code. Mm-hmm. Engineers, again, they try to understand, okay, why are we doing this? What are we trying to solve? Kind of what's the right way to solve things? I will not, again, if somebody is a strong software engineer, I don't think, even if they're fairly junior, I do not think they'll be challenged by kind of that they're losing their job to Gen AI. Mm-hmm. I will be helping them more and more over the years. If you think about this, right? So if you go back, people were started programming in assembly language, and then over time we had a lot more help. Different languages came about, C came about, then garbage collection, Java. So tools kind of are improving all the time. That's great, but I do not think that. It's when my son asks me, hey, kind of, I'm thinking of being a software engineer. What do you think? I don't tell him, no way, because Gen AI will solve all these problems. I tell him, hey, maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah, try it out. And I think their threat or the fear comes from the fact that we don't have their technical systems, but we have a new system that talks the language. And it kind of steps on the territory that has been untouched previously.
Yeah, and look, I think there are areas where I think, yeah, people will be losing jobs, right? Like I remember when I had my first startup, we needed a logo, right? What did we do? We went to some designer. They charged us $20,000 for a fairly crappy logo, and then they said, "You know what? That's our logo. We can't even change it. You have to pay us $10,000 more if you want us to make any changes. Here's the logo. Kind of take it or leave it, right? So, or actually, don't leave it. You already paid us 20,000. So today, any one of Gen AI tools can generate 10 times better logo in 1 minute, right? So clearly, if you're a designer and if you're doing things this way, that's kind of hopefully you'll be out of business. Again, doesn't mean that all designers will be out of business, but kind of I still remember that person. I hope personally that they will be out of business at some point.
Okay. Coming back to the thing that you mentioned for the interviewing of the manager, you said like you want to make sure that the manager is technical, and you run several kinds of interviews. And when the manager gets the job, how does the manager stays technical when the person is in the job? You mentioned for yourself you are kind of going and reading around. What are the approaches that you think are working for people?
So there's a number of things, and I think I wrote some blog post about that at some point. I would say number one is kind of, even if you don't write code, still be a part of some technical meetings, technical discussions, understand what are the technical issues your team is facing, right? So kind of don't just outsource all technical work to your ICs. At least be kind of a part of it. And then there are situations when the team actually needs help, right? So for example, when the team is deciding whether to use some new technology, right? Again, that's to me that, like, I remember at some point I had engineers in my org almost fighting about like React Native versus like native apps, right? So it was very hard for me even to understand, okay, what exactly the problem was. So I went to really to understand kind of the pros and cons of these technologies, and to understand what React is all about, what React Native is all about, how people think about it. So, and I would say that's generally what I suggest people do is stay up to date with new technologies. Like for a while, I mentioned big data. That was a new technology, so that was good to understand. Like the cloud, machine learning, kind of, it's, again, you don't have to be the best hands-on engineer kind of with machine learning, but to understand kind of the basics, to maybe build some simple kind of applications on the side. I feel that's really useful. So again, different people kind of learn and stay technical in different ways. I don't like when people say, "Oh, like, are you hands-on or not?" Either kind of, it's not binary, right? You can be, yeah. If you work for a small company, if you have a small team, as a manager, you can write some production code very well. But at some point, if your team grows, if you work for a larger company, you will not be hands-on kind of all the time, but you can still be very technical and can still go deep if needed. So that's what you're trying to find, is like the people who maybe are not necessarily super deep in every area, but they can go deep. And we're looking for evidence of that. Has this person gone deep in some areas?
Yeah. That's what you mentioned when hiring. So basically understand how deep the person was or in the project, and they understand how deep the person understands the concepts and their decisions are on the technical level and the consequences of those decisions, right?
Yeah, and again, kind of the reason the person during the interview can talk about this is because in their previous position they actually have done
exactly.
They have done this. Like, people ask me sometimes, like, "Oh, how do you prepare for interviews?" Which I'm always like, okay, yes, you can prepare maybe to some degree, but the best way to prepare for interviews is to have interesting, challenging jobs and to actually do the job. And then during the interview, you just talk about what you have done rather than just kind of reciting some preparation. You learn some terms just for the interview, and that usually doesn't work.
Yeah, and let's assume, well, we all know there are lots of different project managers, as you mentioned. There are some coming without technical background. And let's imagine such a project manager said, "Okay, well, guys, I want to work for WhatsApp or for Meta or for whatever company that treats their management job as a partially technical job. What would be the best way for those people to approach their learning or their interview preparation?"
specifically for project managers.
Right, like because project managers, they are, in my opinion, they can manage either IT or tech projects or building construction companies. Or they don't care about their details. They dive into the context, but they kind of apply the techniques that are similar. Might be I might be exaggerating here, but just to bring their idea that I'm trying to.
No, I see. So this actually is a big debate in the industry, right? Meta does not hire into engineering like non-technical project managers. So there is a position called TPM, which is a technical project manager, specifically a technical program manager, which is a person who doesn't actually do a ton of day-to-day technical work, but they manage large technical projects, and it helps for them to understand what they're managing, right? Like when they come to an engineer and ask a question, it helps that they kind of understand the answer. I think there are companies that would hire kind of generic project managers. There's nothing really wrong with that. And there is a whole skill set for like how to think about projects, how to break them.
Absolutely. There's a framework, there's like lots of certifications, right?
So that's all good. Again, does not really happen much in Meta. I've hired people like that to some extent into kind of when I was scaling companies, when you just need some like smart person who can just connect the dots and can make sure that things happen. You still want somebody who is smart, who can understand things, right? Like nobody likes the project manager who just comes to you and says, "Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet?" Without understanding, like, "Hey, we're not done, but we have this other dependency, and this is what we are really building. And we actually have this bug that we need to fix first." So I think it still helps to understand the software industry to some extent. Like I would not hire somebody completely from outside for this, but like I said, Meta goes to the extreme and makes sure that these people have technical degrees and actually have many engineering managers from other companies come to Meta as TPMs and.
Okay. Probably that's the reason why it's called big tech, right? Because you still have to be a technical independent of the position that you're coming to.
Yeah, like if you're talking about engineering projects, yes. I mean, big tech also has lots of other things. There are like sales, marketing. They have project managers who are not technical, and that's entirely okay. So in fact, like if you are building like a sales operations org, you need people who understand sales operations. So that's a whole different. That's a very different situation. But if you're talking about building things and working on engineering projects,
not right.
It's nice to have some degree of understanding, but again, I've seen people be successful without any real degrees or anything as well. So it's not like I don't think there's only one path to success in either big tech companies or small companies. Or you see kind of if you do this long enough, you find people like I've seen very successful people without any technical education or any education at all, right? Just a high school degree. I've seen that. I've seen people with music degrees doing really great technical work. So who am I to say that you have to do it kind of only one way?
The last question from me is, what would be the next appropriate challenge for you that you might be looking in sometime in the future?
Yeah, look, like I already said, I probably don't know, right? So it's probably likely that someday, like, I don't know, maybe a year from now, I'll wake up and say, you know what? It's been like this many years at Meta. It's good enough. I want to do something else. That something else may be doing a startup. It could be doing something, just going to a very different space. Like for example, my last two jobs before Meta were in the health tech space, right? Handle on SciAps. That was very, very interesting. It was a very different space, very different challenges, like understanding genomics, understanding diagnostics, understanding how to use AI kind of in those areas. I may go up there, but I mean, that may very well happen again. But right now, I have no idea.
I understand. All right. Good luck you with that. And thank you very much for this conversation. It has been a pleasure to explore your career and all the challenges and their gambles that you made and how they led you to interesting results and understanding this whole framework.
Great. I really enjoyed it as well. So thank you for inviting me.
Mark, if people want to find out more about you or reach out to you, what is the best way to do it?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. So,
yeah. We'll put your contacts in the description.
A message there, yeah, or just commenting on some posts that I've made, kind of, that should be fine.
Are you hiring to your team?
We are hiring, but in a much more limited way than before. I would say, kind of, as you know, kind of Meta went through like hyper growth phase. Right now, we are hiring, but much more carefully. So all our positions are on the website. So if you go to Meta Careers website, uh, whether specifically for WhatsApp or not, they're all there.
Dear listeners, you might meet with Mark on some interviews if you're interested in working at Meta or WhatsApp or possibly some other company in the future that Mark will be working at. So thank you again, Mark, and dear listeners, if you haven't done this yet, don't forget to subscribe and tell me what you think about Mark experience. And I specifically like the PhD thing when you made a clear decision not to go for it, and all the other different gambles, and actually the environment that you were in that helped you to kind of process and go further into the next step. So I wish you to have this environment further.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, and again, if anybody has any questions, I'll be very happy to follow up.